that brought back some great memories. It is our honor to welcome Sonia here to Parents for Public Schools 20th Anniversary Conference and thank her for what she and her colleagues have meant to so many of our children and families. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Maria, Miss Sonia Manzano.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for inviting me for your 20th anniversary. Congratulations. If the count was here, he would have said 20 years and still counting. So that's a very long time, though I have to say that we've actually been on the air twice as long. We're going to go into our 43rd season very soon. So you saw my double life that I've led on Sesame Street for so long. I am Sonia Manzano, the actress and author, and I also have the fantasy life of Maria, fix-it shop owner and fixer of toasters. And the two lives run neck and neck, and they intertwine. And incredibly enough, it's remarkable that I'm not a schizophrenic person. As I said, we're going to be going into our 43rd season this summer, and I can't believe it, and I'm sure that many of you are wondering how someone could be on a show that lasts and lasts, and lasts and lasts and lasts as long as Sesame Street has. After all, how many ways can I teach the alphabet? How many ways can we count to 20? How many times can I correct Big Bird and Elmo about the very same things? Well, the selfish reason that I've stayed on the show for so many years is that the audience continues to change. Every generation helps keep my mind open to new ideas, and every new generation gives me a better chance or another chance to do better by them. And their needs keep changing. If there's any reason I could point to Sesame Street's longevity is that we try to keep up with the needs of the kids and how they keep changing. For example, I can remember in the very first early years when children started kindergarten, they entered schools already knowing their letters and the alphabet. Well, the school system had to change to accommodate us because the children were bored learning their letters and the alphabets right when they went in. The schools had to adapt to what we did. I, for myself, will never forget the first time I saw Sesame Street. I was a student at Carnegie Mellon University, and I walked into the student union, and there on a big screen was a very young, very bald James Earl Jones reciting the alphabet as the letters flashed over his head. And he was going A, B, C, in this very deliberate manner. I thought I was watching a show that taught lip reading. I was compelled and absolutely taken up by it. And then, when I saw the people on the show, I was even more intrigued because Mr. Hooper, the candy store owner, looked just like the candy store owner on my block when I was a kid. And the stoop was everybody's stoop. And then when I saw Susan and Gordon, this gorgeous, urban, African-American couple on television that were so real, I was really taken. This is hard for many of you to believe, but in 1969, there were almost no people of color on television. And if they were, they certainly weren't this charming, wholesome couple that we saw in Susan and Gordon. Of course, it was the 1960s. The country was going through a lot of social upheaval. It was ahead of the days of Head Start, the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement. There were marches on Washington. We were listening to the philosophies of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. We were a very loud generation. Whether we were black or white or Hispanic, we blamed everybody over 40 with everything that was going wrong. And schools had to change. There was an open admissions initiative was implemented, and colleges were really trying to diversify. The prospectus for the Children's Television Workshop in 1968, and that's what they sent to the Rockefeller Foundation to get money to do Sesame Street, read as the following. It is becoming obvious that no one knows what the world is going to be like when the time comes for the younger to live in it. So perhaps the kindest thing we can do is to try not to burden them with the quaint details of today's beliefs and customs, but just attempt to get across a few principles of how things interact, what is basic in human life, and to acquaint them with as thorough a cross-section as possible of persons, places, and things as they now stand. After this, we can only give them a pat on the shoulder and wish them well, unquote. Now, the idealistic idea behind that proposal was that underprivileged children could start school at the same level as their middle-class peers if these kids saw people like themselves on television, and they could learn their cognitive skills, and they would see people on television that looked like them imparting these cognitive skills. Joan Gans Cooney, who was responsible for Sesame Street, thought it was possible to harness the power of television to teach these basic skills, letters and numbers, to underprivileged children. Because she noticed that kids could remember jingles, commercials on television, and she said if they can remember commercials and jingles, why can't they remember letters and numbers? That's why in the early years, at the end of the show, we'd say, this show is brought to you by the letter 2 and by the number 2 and the letter S. So Sesame Street came out of a very exciting time in America, the conscious raising time. Change was in the air and was happening on all fronts. Women were wearing bell-bottom pants for the first time and hip huggers. They were burning their underwear. They were tired of being in the kitchen and wanted to join the workforce. It was a time when the family structure was going through its very first transition. Young people all over the country were demonstrating, protesting against the war in Vietnam and taking over their college campuses. There are no PCs, no computers. Computers are as big as houses. I remember we couldn't refer to colors on the show because people did not have color television sets. We couldn't say, oh, Big Bird, your feathers are so beautiful in yellow today. I would say that all the time and be corrected. Of course, Head Start, that inspired early education children's show, was in existence. The civil rights movement was growing. People realized that half of our population was being denied basic rights. Of all of that turmoil came Sesame Street. And I think we've come a long way, certainly not as long as we would have liked. But the educational landscape has certainly improved dramatically from when I was a kid. I'm Puerto Rican. I was born in this country and raised in the South Bronx. Neighborhood made famous by President Carter when he visited, and the media was full of stories of these horrible pictures of the South Bronx. It looked like a war zone. It wasn't like that when I lived there. I lived there before Howard Cosell, the famous sports announcer, said the Bronx is burning. That was in the 70s. I lived even there before that, but it was still an inner city neighborhood. Everybody was poor, everybody was Puerto Rican, and we all went to public school. When I went to grade school, there was a system in place called a tracking system. I don't know if it still is in place. Is it? If you're considered smart in the first grade, you'd be in the smartest first grade class, then in the smartest second grade class, and so on and so forth for your whole elementary school career. If you weren't considered smart, you'd be in the low achievers class for your whole elementary school career. Well, you're probably wondering what class I was in, and I'm happy to say I was in the high achieving class, the #1 class. I had a very easy time of school in the inner city. I did very well. But then again, very little was expected of me. I breezed right through elementary school and got into middle school with minimum effort. Junior high school was the same way. We had desks where you could put your hands in. I could give myself manicures in my desk, raise my hand, dry my nails, and still come up with the right answer. Well, I got good grades. Around that time, a teacher told me about this special school called the High School of Performing Arts. If you know it, it's the famed school. It was a television show and it was a movie. Well, that's a real place, one of the New York specialized schools. And he told me about it, and I applied. And if it hadn't been for that teacher, I would have been perfectly happy to stay in the Bronx. I had no interest in going into any other boroughs. I auditioned and I got accepted. And then I was in for the rudest awakening of my life, because I went from being an A student in the inner city to a C- student in a specialized school. Why? Because all of the other students had been to better elementary schools in better neighborhoods, and their basic skills were far superior to mine. They came from middle-class homes. I couldn't compete with them. These kids knew how to debate. They knew how to stick to their points without getting into a fight. I misunderstood arguments. I had a hard time participating in class discussions. My method of learning had been to memorize, not to actually think things through. I couldn't compete socially, because I went to school now with kids who went to Europe on vacations on a regular basis. I had never been out of the Bronx. Maintaining this low average took all of my energy. Also, before performing arts, everybody I went to school looked just like me and talked just like me. Now I was in an environment where nobody was like me. Finally, it was time to go to college, and once again, I thought I was way in over my head. I got in, and I remember I had to write an essay, and I thought it was a brilliant essay, and the girl who wrote about her prom got the highest marks, and I was insulted. I thought that my essay was much more profound, and the teacher said, well, it probably was, but I can't read it. Your spelling is so atrocious, and your grammar is incomprehensible, so it just might be much better, but I cannot get through this. Well, once I understood that it was not my ideas that were bad, that it was my elementary school education that fell short, I was able to deal with it, and I sought out the tutoring that I needed. And that's how it was in those days. You demanded things in those days, and you got it. My parents had very little idea what was going on in school with me. They trusted the teachers, and they came from a culture that would never question someone in authority, like a doctor or a policeman, or certainly not a teacher. As you saw the DVD, on the DVD, I had a child on Sesame Street, Gabriella. She's also my child in real life. In any case, on the show, she had to go to school. And as I said, I remembered all the preparations that we went through on Sesame Street to get Gabriella into school. It's a show for children, but we want to set good examples for parents who are watching as well. So Maria and Luis, my TV husband, were very involved in getting Gabriella to preschool. We showed Maria and Luis taking Gabriella there, visiting, reading her books about school, giving her pictures of ourselves, so she would have something comforting to look at in case she had like an emotional breakdown in preschool, missing us, how children do. We gave the same treatment to Miles when he started school. If you recall, Miles was Susan and Gordon's son. Does anybody remember that? We showed Susan and Gordon being very involved in helping with homework in ways that we hoped that it would inspire parents who were watching the show to help their children with homework. And if you may not know this, but Miles is Roscoe Orman's real son. Maybe I should clear a few things up about the cast before going any further. I know it can get a little confusing figuring out what's real and what isn't on Sesame Street. Some of us, like Bob, kept our real names. Some of us play characters, and some of us play ourselves. When I think about it, we were the first reality show. Without the whining. As a matter of fact, many people think that Luis and I are really married. Did anybody think that he was my real husband? Some people do, and I'll tell you a story. We were performing someplace one evening, and we went out together, and somebody recognized us and stopped us and said, "Oh my gosh, it's so wonderful to meet you. I want to thank you that my children should see real love on television, that they should see a real relationship happen." And Amelia and I looked at each other and we decided to tell her the truth. We said, "Madam, I'm sorry, but we're not really married." And she went, "Well, as long as you really love each other." But anyway, back to the way Sesame Street prepares children for school. We have a huge research department, and we have seminars, and actors, writers, and producers, and Muppets mingle with the educators and parents and community leaders who tell us what the educational trends are. And they share with us what's expected of schools of children when they start school. We take those ideas and try to depict them in humorous ways. When I first became aware of the way Sesame Street worked, it was because I questioned the Hispanic segments of our show. I thought that there were more ways of expressing Spanish culture than food and guitars and language, and I thought that they should be explored, and the producers said, "Well, listen, why don't you try to write some of those bits yourself?" And a week later, I found a curriculum book as big as this big that explained the mission of the show and delineated all of its goals and what the show wanted to get across. And the first thing that struck me was the book was entitled Sesame Street's Curriculum for its 12th or 13th experimental year. And I thought that was remarkable, that we could still call ourselves an experimental show after being on so long and clearly a success. But that idea of experimenting was key to my understanding how the show worked. New goals are introduced every season. I remember one season in one of those seminars it came out that Puerto Rican children should know, and this is particular to us, that there could be people of different skin tones in the same family. So I was able to write a bit where a cousin comes to visit me and the Muppets have trouble believing, Telly has trouble believing he's my cousin because he looks so different from me. And we were able to touch on that subject. Well, the process is always exciting and dangerous, and never knew exactly how we were going to solve our problems. Sometimes we didn't agree. As when I was pregnant on the show, and they did a pregnancy storyline, it was the 80s, and at that time it was very popular for female movie stars to have a child outside of wedlock. It kind of showed that you were a feminist and you were free, and Murphy Brown did it on television. So I thought that Maria, if anybody repeats this, I'm gonna say I never said it. I thought that, I'll say there was something in your lunch and you heard wrong, no. I thought that it would be a good idea if Maria had a child out of wedlock because I was really pregnant, so they had to put it onto the show. Well, thankfully, there were people, reasonable, smarter, more responsible people than me on the staff that obviously pointed out how irresponsible that would be. But I guess I'm telling you these stories because as you work with the different organizations that you work for, I know that your parents involved with the schools, ideas have to be tossed about without any shame and without any preconceived notions about how you're going to solve a problem. And that tension will be exactly what will give you the right answer. We wanted to take on the tragedy of divorce, and we had the Snuffleupagus' parents fighting, or not sharing, not fighting, not sharing something, and Mr. Snuffleupagus sat on the sofa. We shot the shows, we showed the shows to the children kept away. We said, well, what does it mean when they're gonna get a divorce? Well, when they sleep on the sofa. I mean, that's what they got. So we couldn't show that, but it was an effort. And we try to accept what our research department tells us, even if we don't like it. We wanted to do something with Native Americans, and we thought if we did their folk tales as the way we do fairy tales with the Muppets, that it would be a good way to show their culture, but every folk tale had a very sacred connotation. So we couldn't do it. So, you know, and somebody said, well, let's find some other Native Americans. And then one producer said, well, it's not about finding people who agree with us. That's what they said. I mean, you can't, you know, it's finding out what the best way to go about it. And out of that, we actually visited real reservations, and that was the way to go. So I would encourage you, as you have conferences and you meet the administrators and you're dealing with the school system, that you try to keep this open air of airing things out that might be uncomfortable. I was most proud to be part of Sesame Street when we did the Goodbye Mr. Hooper show. Mr. Hooper died, our beloved cast member, and nobody wanted to say that Mr. Hooper died. They wanted to say he retired, he went to Florida, anything but that. And the producer said, why not talk about death on their level? Why shortchange them about it? And it's become an icon of Sesame Street, and she had a tough time pushing that through, and it's become a wonderful, I always think of that show as the reason that I love to be on Sesame Street so much. Now you might think that the curriculum of race, pregnancy, and death are not as exciting as teaching kids about going to school, where we have to tell them to raise their hands, take turns, work together, ask questions. But the same amount of thought went into our school curriculum as into our more loaded topics. And you know, these little curriculums like asking questions, I'll just tell you quickly, I did not know when I was in elementary school that it was okay to ask a teacher a question. I was raised that if you ask an adult something, you were showing them disrespect. And it never occurred to me to ask somebody a question. And I remember one time the teacher was doing a math problem and I didn't know how he got something, and it just burst out of my mouth. I said, where did you get the number 2? I clamped my hand over my mouth saying, oh, now I'm gonna get in real trouble. And he said, you got it from here. And he answered it, and I knew. And in retrospect, I think this poor teacher must have been sitting there with a classroom of Puerto Rican kids just being totally obedient and never, you know, he must have been going nuts and never asking him questions. So these little lessons are important. I can't give a talk without mentioning the Muppets. People believe in Elmo and Big Bird and Oscar. Their belief is so great. I know you want to hear about them. I was once in the studio in Big Bird, Carol Spinney is a man, and the suit is in 2 pieces. He's talking like this, and he took the top half of his suit off, and there was a kid standing next to me, and the kid was completely cool. He turned to me and he said, Maria, does Big Bird know there's a man in him? So they totally believe in these puppets when they're hanging. They go up to him and say, oh, Telly, how are you today? And the puppet is not saying anything, and they'll have a conversation with these puppets. Because the puppets are so great, for many years we were criticized for not having a Hispanic puppet or a female puppet. And I'll tell you, this is a secret. Don't repeat this to anyone. The reason it was very difficult for me is because in order to have a funny or compelling puppet, the puppet has to be compulsive or neurotic. Okay? Cookie Monster's funny because he's obsessed with eating cookies. Grover's funny because he thinks he's so cute and helpful. And Elmo's funny because he's one-dimensional cheerful. Right? One-dimensional. Well, we couldn't give any of these traits to a female or ethnic puppet. Imagine a girl who was one-dimensionally cheerful. Well, she'd come across like not the kind of little image we want to give young girls who we want to join the workforce and have their own lives and all of that. Or imagine a young girl eating a lot of cookies like the Cookie Monster. Then we'd be accused of showing girls with eating disorders. Or imagine a Hispanic or African American puppet like Grover. Well, you know, then we'd be accused of showing ethnic people as being shallow or, you know, not being serious, so they wanted all ethnic puppets or female puppets to be doctors or lawyers, which is not the funniest kind of, that doesn't come to my mind as a humorous person necessarily. So we did nothing for a while. But I'm happy to report that we finally do have a female puppet, Rosita, and the secret to her success is that Rosita is Mexican, from Mexico, and has always wanted to be a puppeteer. So because it's a real person and it's coming from her heart, that's a real puppet. And of course, as you all know, Elmo is played by an African-American man, Kevin Clash, and which has nothing to do with Elmo, but he certainly has made that puppet come to life. So Sesame Street in general has certainly been able to provide a lot of answers. But we want to tell parents, and we want everybody to know that we've never tried to take the place of real teachers and real parents, even though I feel sometimes that parents want us to. We've gotten requests that Sesame Street handle topics like sex, drugs, and table manners, and potty training. I mean, one parent said to me, my kid doesn't like his grandparents. Could you do a show that teaches them to like their grandparents? I mean, this is very personal stuff, lady. You're not going to get it from television. A lot of parents want to be told what is the best kind of children's programming. They don't want to sit in front of the television with the kid and decide and have conversations about the programming and decide for themselves what a good show is. And now that we live in such complex times and we need critical thinkers now more than ever, Americans have seemed to have lost that capacity. I mean, everything on the internet is outrageous statement for 1 minute because we're going to forget about it the next day, or says this, you know, and everybody's all up in arms, or is this person really nice? They're simple. We want good guys and bad guys. And it's interesting to me because this country is based on the myth that we're all individuals. But it's like we want more and more to be told exactly what to do. We want to know who the good guy is, the bad guy is. And we've become a country of extreme arguments, like should we eat eggs ever? Or is milk good for me? Is bread something I should eat? Should television shows be directed at 2-year-olds? You know, when I started the show, the idea that a 2-year-old should be watching television was abhorrent to everybody on Sesame Street. Now we're creating programming for 2-year-olds because times change or things change, and now we know kids pick up information earlier than they did. But that's because we had to go through the thinking process to get there. Are kids, this is another great question, are kids at a disadvantage if they don't go to preschool? People want answers to this, and they're comfortable with making generic statements about family values, and this is a dangerous territory here, instead of actually figuring out what is the right lifestyle for them. And let's talk about family values, because this phrase always makes me uncomfortable because I don't understand whose family they're talking about. There's so many different kinds of families. Our preconceived notions about the universal way to raise kids or educate them and whose responsibility it is, it's over. There's no one way to do anything. Let's assume that a close family demonstrates good family values, right? Close families. Well, a movie comes to mind. Did anybody see Real Women Have Curves? This is America Ferrera's first movie. It's a very wonderful indie film. And it's the story of a young girl in a Mexican-American family in California who gets a full scholarship to Columbia University, which is an Ivy League school in New York. In the movie, her parents want her to turn it down because it would take her too far from home. They wanted to go to the community college in LA and stay working in their business. They have a business. Well, I left the theater thinking, oh, what a great, funny movie. That girl's going to be a big star. But that would never happen in a real family. Well, the next month or so, I was invited to give a talk in a Texas town to parents and their teenage kids. And the issue was that they lived in such close-knit families, they could never leave home. These kids couldn't leave the block. They couldn't leave the neighborhood, even to accept good internships, like in the next state, or generous scholarships. So one can say that their family values and culture, their close culture, prevented them from succeeding in this culture, in American culture, where it's all about get out there and Horatio Alger and do your thing, and that's what's gonna get you ahead. I've heard of newly arrived families to this country who have such extended families, the kids never attend preschool because there's always a grandmother. They never attend daycare or preschool because there's always a grandmother, there's always an aunt that's gonna take care of them until they reach kindergarten. So these kids start first grade or kindergarten, and they're already behind because they don't know how to socialize and kind of negotiate the politics of the preschool classroom. So this illustrates to me how how complicated things are, and how there's no right answer for anything. Some struggle because there's no extended family, and others struggle because there's too much of an extended family. I was raised to be, as I said, obedient. In my culture, it was attractive, but it doesn't get you anywhere in America. And it pains me to see some parents disciplining their kids at the cost of squashing their curiosity. By the way, I think it probably worked in Puerto Rico to be obedient. That was the best thing, the best way to go about things was to do that. But it didn't work here. Sometimes, if you recall the story of Pinocchio, the wood carver who doesn't want a wooden boy. He wants the real boy that moves and jumps up and down. And I see parents want a wooden kid. They want the kid who's quiet and never talks and never questions, and questioning, how no matter how irritating it could be, is the thing that parents have to know to do. I see them, they come to Sesame Street and the mother's going like, this kid never shuts up. And I'm thinking, this kid is gonna get the job on Sesame Street because we need kids to talk. You bring him here to get the job, and then I said, well, that's gonna, get him. And I remember coming home from work and being upset when the babysitter would tell me that. I said, how'd the day go with my kid, Gabrielle? And the babysitter would say, she didn't give me any problems. I'm thinking, what's that? What's wrong with my kid? She should have given you some problems. You should have wanted something. Our job is very hard. Everybody in this room's job is very hard because we live in a society that makes believe it cares for kids and education. Whenever funds need cutting, what's the first thing that goes? It's kids, because they don't vote and they don't pay taxes on their own. You should all watch that great movie, Waiting for Superman. It's a very thought-provoking movie, and I was speaking to somebody on your staff, and they said that you have watched it. But that movie proves to me that schools need parent participation now more than ever. Seems a good time to bring up the No Child Left Behind initiative. Maybe I will. I don't know if it's a good program or bad program, but I know that if learning is a social act, how can the same program that benefits a kid living on a farm in Idaho gonna help a kid who lives in the South Bronx? Can one program accommodate the needs of children who come from many, many different backgrounds? Then, of course, it turned out the states didn't have the money to implement the program, so. And it's very complicated for parents to get all that it offers. If you as a parent can get through the paperwork of the No Child Left Behind, you probably went to college. And you don't need No Child Left Behind because you can help your kid yourself. It just sounds too easy. And I suspect it got implemented because people are not willing to see the two sides of an argument, the pros and cons, to to look at the details of it. That's what I mean, this oversimplification. We just want, is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? Or, it's not that easy. We struggle on Sesame Street to teach kids that they should be proud of their cultures while also teaching them that we're all the same. We teach them that though we speak different languages, we all have the same feelings. But we do. We teach that there's two truths going on at the same time. Beware of over-testing. No matter what your position is, testing nowadays certainly seems more important than actually knowing anything. It's not something that I value, but I have to tell you that when Gabby was going to college, I fell into the testing trap as well, and our table was covered with books and tutors, a militia of tutors was brought in on teaching her how to sort of pick the right answer. There was a system of, had a certain amount of guesswork was involved. It was littered with these practice tests. And then the SAT, you could take it 3 times. Well, I have to say, I said to my kid, you're gonna take it once, that's it. I'm not gonna fall into this trap of, I think they just wanted money, because then they charge parents every time they make them, and then you send the best scores, but that feeds into this anxiety. And more important, I think that this kind of, you can tell everything you need to know from a test misleads college students because they think that passing the test will get them on the road to success. I raised my own daughter to pass the test but not lose her common sense. Pass the test, but then find out things for yourself. And never forget to follow your own instincts. Because sometimes you have to maneuver. Many kids leave for college and come back after 1 semester because they haven't learned how to maneuver. They're upset because they passed the test and they're not exactly what they thought, what the track they were going to be on, and they can't figure out another path for themselves. A lot of people obviously always ask me, well, how come you were an actress? I love acting, certainly, but I have to tell you that the way I got into performing arts and later on to college was an audition. Because I had to maneuver. I had to go to college. I wanted to go to college no matter what. I wasn't going to make it on my grades. And at that time, you could make it on it's like being like a sports scholarship. You could do it, I did it on acting. So I got it on acting, and I love acting, and now I'm writing, and I love writing. So I'll never know if I really, really wanted to be an actress. But I do know that I learned how to maneuver. If it's not going to be this way, I'm going to get in this way. And I think kids are going to lose the capacity to do that if they're tunnel visioned into testing and not thinking. Also, it ties teachers' hands. One teacher said this, I read this teacher said, how can I expect, she made this analogy between over-tested kids and plants by saying, how can I expect this plant to grow if I keep ripping it out of the ground to check its roots? That's a good analogy, right? And it lets, testing special kids fall through the cracks. I know a 10-year-old boy who loves very interested in World War II. He knows all of General Rommel's marches through North Africa, can converse on it, yet he can't move on in his class because he can't spell. And his poor teacher can't pass him because he can't, overcome this one problem. So the teacher is put in the position of not seeing the individual kid. She sees a kid that has to know everything. And teachers are, of course, undervalued. When I was a kid, to grow up to want to be a teacher was a big thing. I mean, it was like teacher, it was a very big thing. And teachers don't have that clout anymore. And they just don't impart their body of information to kids. They're also responsible for inspiring them. They're not all perfect. I've had bad ones, but for every bad one, I guess I've had 2 good ones. My 5th grade teacher, Mr. Gitterman, read Charlotte's Web to us, and I'll never forget that. Watch them fly. We need to make parents aware of teaching moments. Well, I'm running out of time. That a bus ride can be full of learning and adventure. If you entertain the kid by asking him to count count all the yellow cars that you see, or find certain letters and numbers on the street before you get off. It's more fruitful to do that than to tell them to be quiet for the whole trip. This is because I take the bus a lot in New York City. I know that nobody else is on public transportation as much as New Yorkers are, so I see the kid dramas all the time. When I first became a writer for Sesame Street, I was intrigued by a curriculum that said, the child's powers in his world. And over the years, I've realized what that means. You empower children in little ways. When you let them put money in the washing machine slots, when you're doing the laundry, you empower them. When you let them push the buttons at the ATM machine, you empower them. You teach them about manipulating the world and that they own it when you allow them to push the elevator buttons to help them go and find the place, find the floor they want to go to. My mother remembers her years when we were growing up as full of hardship. We were poor and suffered everything a migrant family could suffer, yet I remember those years as being great. I remember we passed this outcropping of rocks every day on my way to school, and I would wonder what I could see from the top, and if I would ever be strong enough or big enough to climb it. One day I did, and I was a foot shy, and these were the days when any neighbor could stop you from doing anything. And the neighbor said, "Get down from there, you're gonna break your neck." And she said, "I'm gonna tell your mother." Well, my mother never beat us like most mothers did at the time, but if she was gonna start, that day would have been a good day because she was mad at me. That morning, I tried to play a joke on her by making believe I fell asleep in the closet. The problem was I did fall asleep, and it just added to the hysteria of getting out of the house. The schedule was tight. She was getting lunch, dressed, coordinated. There was no time for fooling around and making jokes. So she was pretty annoyed. Anyway, the neighbor said I was going to get it from my mother, but the exact opposite happened. My mother laughed it off, and she said, "Well, what do you know? Maybe she's going to be an explorer." Well, my self-esteem went like in that 1 second. I remember the exact moment I learned how to read. I was with my older sister. My older sister was born exasperated. Everything was like, oh. She was 8 years older than I was, and I was on the 3rd Avenue L, and I wondered what the ads said above my head, and I asked her, and she went, "Why don't you try reading it?" And I thought that reading was only something you did at school with Dick and Jane books. You read to a certain page, and then you wanted to read further, but the teacher wouldn't let you. You had to catch up. So everybody catch up. So I thought reading was something you did at school on these Dick and Jane books with this irritating teacher who wouldn't let me pass the page. I didn't realize you could read words everywhere, that they were free, that you could do it every day. Well, I tried reading the ad and I could. And I was thrilled and I trembled with excitement the rest of the way home. And I read all the ads. They were about nylon stockings, how good smoke at women, and I read all about the hopes and dreams of Miss Subway 1957 to my heart's content. Sesame Street has proven that children pick up much more than we thought. They're much more intuitive. My own daughter once asked me, "Do dogs know what they look like?" Another time she said, "When you and Daddy were kids, I didn't have any parents." She's trying to angle for ideas and opinion. My daughter did. I suggest we nurture their unbound spirit. We all know of children who come from troubled families rise above it all, and that's always amazing to me. They can live through the chaos around them, proving again that we're born with our own skills. That kid that was homeless for her whole 18 years and nobody knew it, it ended up in Harvard. Teachers didn't know it. It's amazing. There's proof everywhere. In troubled times, in these troubled times, I see many photos in newspapers of war-torn places. And they're photos of barricades set up in preparation for conflict to protect soldiers. And you'll see kids in these photos leaping for joy, looking at the camera, you know, laughing, like these barricades were set up just for them to play hide and seek. It was perfect. Each generation on some level hopes and assumes that the next one will be better. We all hope that children will see things more clearly than we do and do better than we have done. They'll be better, smarter, and more compassionate than we are. That's why we all love the scene in Spielberg's movie E.T. Come on, you all love that scene when the children are being chased by the well-meaning but benighted adults, and the kids take off on their bicycles and fly across, and everybody's doing this, going, oh, the children will save us. We love that story. It's in all the literature. We love that feeling. It comforts us that the coming generations will. We love out of the mouths of babes. Oh, how cool. We saw that. We just think it's wonderful because it gives us a little bit of more hope that if they said it, maybe it'll stick next time. The world has changed since 9/11. It'll never get back to normal. This is the new normal. But I remember reading all the obituaries of all the people who lost their lives in that tragedy, because the New York Times said something about everybody. That they were a very diverse group of people. There were all kinds of cultures working in that building, but they all had this similar hopes and dreams. They all wanted to have a job. They all wanted to have a family, go on vacation once a year, and right down the line, they all wanted to have an education for themselves and their kids. America's school systems are getting more and more complex. I remember when Joel Klein got appointed Chancellor of New York City's Department of Education, my husband said, being appointed to that job must be like walking into a buzzsaw. And then when New York's mayor appointed Kathy Black, the first person from a business sector, not an educator, as school chancellor, I think I was the only person in the city who thought it was a good idea. I have to admit, I thought someone from the private sector would get things done because I had been to so many schools that had donated books, but they got lost and misplaced because of the bureaucracy. I heard of a school that got computers donated to them, but they couldn't use them because they didn't have the proper outlets. Or I went to a school, you couldn't walk up on the stage even though they had steps because the bureaucracy hadn't approved that they could use these steps. Things that are Machiavellian in their complexity that seem so simple. And I thought, well, maybe a business person is used to like, do it. You know, I'm in business and I'm not gonna fool around. But then she didn't last. She didn't have any good people skills. And then there's the Michelle Rhee, R-H-E-E, the Chancellor of Washington. I mean, she was a hot number. The Chancellor of Washington, D.C. Public Schools. She raised a lot of questions when she took on the teachers union. I don't know if she was wrong or right. I read up on her on Wikipedia, and it's so the issues are so complicated. I still couldn't understand it all. And Wikipedia breaks it down to the lowest common denominator, but it's very complicated. I don't have enough knowledge to give you an opinion on her work. Plus, I don't want to walk into a buzzsaw myself. But she did say something that stayed with me. She said, once again, the comfort of adults took precedence over the comfort of the students. And I thought that was a really telling statement. There's no right answer. There are only parents and teachers working together, solving specific problems of schools in their communities. Americans are still the most imaginative people. We are still the ones who mostly think out of the box. We do terrible things, but we do wondrous things also by the same token. And I think we are people of goodwill. So I'll share this last story with you before I leave. It's a story about Jim Henson, the creator of the Muppets, and his daughter Cheryl Henson told me this. She said that when Jim went to meetings, he'd bring back a knotted piece of string to show her how the meeting went. If it was a difficult meeting, there'd be a lot of knots in the string. And if it was an easy meeting, there'd be fewer knots in it. And then they would have to undo the knots. And what stays with me is that he never said problems were unsolvable. The implication to me was that you can solve all problems if you are willing to sit there and untie the knots. So thank you for having me to your 20th anniversary. I hope you have 20 more years of doing your good work. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you. Gracias. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So, Ms. Manzano will be downstairs signing books, so I would encourage you to go talk with her and get books. They're going to be setting up for a panel discussion, so we're going to have about a 10-minute break before we start.